Zayden Scott stood outside the towering glass building with a paint roller in one hand and a folded paper with the address in the other, sweat already beading at his temples. "This is it," he muttered, glancing up at the 30-story skyscraper that gleamed like it didn't even know what struggle meant. He wiped his hands on the back of his jeans. His daughter, Mila, was waiting at home with his neighbor Mrs. Carson, who thankfully never said no when he begged for another favor. He owed that woman more than he could count, but he needed this job. Bad. "Paint the executive floor's side office," the guy on the phone had said. "Quick, clean, and don't get in anyone's way." Zayden stepped into the lobby, nodding awkwardly at the receptionist who barely looked up. "Painter's here," he said, holding up his roller like it was a badge. "Elevator 31. Top floor. Left hallway," she replied flatly, already back to typing. The elevator climbed with a soft hum, but Zayden's thoughts roared. Rent was late again. Mila had outgrown her sneakers. And his truck needed a new radiator. One job at a time, he reminded himself. Just get through today. On the top floor, the air changed. It smelled like Success leather, espresso, and probably something imported. He found the office with a taped note. "Repaint walls. White. No splatter." He set his supplies down and started taping the trim. Half an hour in, he heard the sharp click of heels down the hall. Loud. Confident. Then a voice low, annoyed, and commanding. "I said the London proposal goes to legal first. How is that not clear?" The doors swung open behind him. He turned, roller mid-stroke. She stood there in a fitted navy dress, dark waves cascading over her shoulder, phone in one hand, iced coffee in the other. Her tone was sharp, but her eyes hazel, wide landed on him and paused. He froze. She blinked. Sorry," she said, pulling the phone from her ear. "I didn't realize someone was already in here." He wiped his hand on his shirt. "Just doing my job. Didn't mean to interrupt." Whatever business magic that was. The woman let out a small laugh, surprised but amused. "Business magic. That's new." He gave a lopsided smile. "I'm Zayden. Here to put a fresh coat of boring white on these walls." She stepped inside, glancing around. "I'm Kaia. I work here." "Work here" was an understatement. Her office was next door. Her name was on the door. Kaia Daniels, CEO. He saw the plaque when he walked past. She wasn't just successful. She ran the whole building. Zayden turned back to the wall. "Didn't think the boss herself would be checking in." "I wasn't. This office used to be mine," she said, a touch softer now. "I just like seeing it sometimes." He paused, glanced at her. "Memories?" Kaia shrugged. "Something like that." For the next 2 hours, Zayden worked while Kaia stayed in the office next door. He could hear her voice direct, fast, in charge. Every now and then, she walked past again. Once, she stopped. "You missed a spot," she said, pointing. He looked. "You sure you don't want to just grab a brush and help?" She raised an eyebrow. "That sounds like a trap." He grinned. "Only if you don't mind paint in your hair." She laughed again. Actual laughter this time. It was warm. Unexpected. Zayden stepped back. "You don't really seem like the type to hang around painters." Kaia leaned against the doorframe. "And you don't seem like the type to care what type I am." He met her eyes. "I don't." Something shifted. A pause. Long enough for him to feel it in his chest. Later that afternoon, while packing up his gear, Kaia returned with a cup in hand. "Coffee," she said, offering it to him. He blinked. "For me? Unless you suddenly turned down caffeine." He took it, surprised. "Thanks. I wasn't expecting." Kaia crossed her arms. "You've been working since 8. You deserve more than a paper cup and silence." He sipped, then smiled. "This isn't cheap stuff." She smirked. "I don't do cheap." He looked at her, really looked. Confident. Beautiful. Way out of his league. But then again, she was the one offering him coffee. That night, he picked Mila up from Mrs. Carson's and tucked her into bed. She curled up in her unicorn blanket, her small hand clutching his fingers. "Did you paint today, Daddy?" she asked sleepily. "Yeah. Big office. Big windows. Smelled like flowers and money." She giggled. "Did you meet a princess?" He paused, thinking of Kaia's laugh, the way she handed him coffee like it wasn't weird at all. "Maybe," he said. "She wore heels instead of a crown." Mila smiled, already drifting off. The next morning, when Zayden showed up to finish the trim, Kaia was already in the hallway. Waiting. "You're early," he said, eyebrows raised. "So are you," she replied, handing him another cup of coffee. He took it, then tilted his head. "You always hang out with the help." She looked amused. "Only the ones who talk back." He chuckled. "Then I guess I'm your worst nightmare." Kaia stared at him for a moment, then said, "Or something else entirely." By the third day, she was finding excuses to check in. By the fourth, she brought him lunch. By the fifth, Zayden found himself waiting for her to appear in the hallway, coffee in hand, smile tugging at her lips. He wasn't sure what this was. But it was something. Something good. And maybe, just maybe, his luck was starting to change. Zayden adjusted the strap of his tool bag as he stepped out of the elevator, his boots echoing softly against the polished marble floor. His usual routine was to get in, finish the work, and get out before anyone noticed him. But since meeting Kaia, that rhythm had shifted subtly, but unmistakably. Today, she wasn't waiting outside the office. He frowned, not because he expected her, but because he'd grown used to her casual, unannounced appearances. The way she'd lean against the doorway, balancing a drink in one hand and a challenge in her gaze. He'd never met someone who looked at him like she was trying to figure out whether to laugh or dare him to something bold. He pushed the door open and got to work. The room was nearly finished, just a few corners left to touch up. He took his time. Not because he was stalling. Just being precise. The door creaked open behind him. He didn't turn. "I thought maybe you left town," he said. "I ran late," Kaia replied. "Board meeting. Apparently billion-dollar contracts require more than a signature." He stood and faced her. Her blazer was off, tossed over her arm, and she was holding a small white box. "You bringing me paperwork now?" She raised an eyebrow. "It's a cupcake." He lowered the roller and stepped closer. "What's the occasion?" She opened the box. Inside sat a single chocolate cupcake with gold sprinkles and a tiny paper flag that said, "Thank you. You finished early," she said. "And the office looks better than it ever has." He scratched the back of his neck. "Can't take credit for the walls staying up. You could have rushed it. I've seen guys do worse in half the time." He gestured at the cupcake. "You always reward good work with sugar?" "Only when I'm impressed." He took the box, their fingers brushing briefly. She didn't pull away. He glanced at her, then down at the cupcake. "I don't know if I should eat this or frame it." "Eat it," she said. "Framing food is a waste of decent calories." He laughed. "You're not what I expected from a CEO." Kaia leaned against the edge of the desk. "What did you expect?" "Sharp words. Sharper heels. Someone who forgets the names of people below the top floor." She tilted her head. "And yet here you are. I'm still trying to figure out what that means." She gave a lopsided shrug. "Maybe I just like watching you work." Zayden blinked. "You don't hold back, do you?" "Not when I don't need to." He sat on the edge of the windowsill, still holding the cupcake box. "You know, you're lucky I'm not easily intimidated." "I know you're not," she said, folding her arms. "That's why I'm still here." A silence settled. Not awkward. Just charged. Zayden finally said, "I've got a daughter." Kaia nodded, like she'd been waiting for something real. "How old?" 6. She's got a thing for unicorns and peanut butter sandwiches. Not at the same time, thankfully. She sounds smarter than most of the board. He smiled, then looked down. She's the reason I take every job I can. Including this one. Kaia didn't flinch. And the reason you've been looking over your shoulder since the first day. He met her eyes. You noticed? You're careful. And careful people usually have someone to protect. He studied her face. You always read people this well? I never had the luxury of guessing wrong, she said. Another beat passed before she added. You're not like the men I usually meet. Let me guess, he said. They wear tailored suits and lie with confidence. They wear tailored suits and lie with contracts. He let that sit between them before saying, So why talk to me? Why bring cupcakes? Kaia walked over and took the empty paint tray from his hand. Because you look me in the eye. And you don't care who I am. I know who you are, he said. I just don't think it changes anything. Her eyes lingered on his for a moment too long. Then she said, Come with me. He stood. Where? I have a dinner tonight. Charity fundraiser. My assistant cancelled. And I'm tired of being surrounded by people who only talk about money. You want to bring your painter to a black tie event? She smiled faintly. Only if he washes his hands first. Zayden hesitated. I don't own a tux. I'll take care of that. He rubbed his jaw. You can't just dress up a guy like me and parade me around a ballroom. I'm not parading you, she said. I'm choosing you. He stared at her for a long second, then finally said, You're impossible to say no to. I know. She turned to leave but added over her shoulder. 7 o'clock. Don't be late. After she was gone, Zayden looked down at the half-eaten cupcake. He still didn't know what this was. But it definitely wasn't just another job. Zayden adjusted the black cuffs of the tuxedo Kaia had sent to his apartment earlier that evening. It had arrived in a garment bag with a handwritten note that simply read, No paint stains allowed. He'd stood staring at it for a solid minute before realizing it probably cost more than his rent. Now, standing at the base of the grand staircase inside the Langford Hotel, he felt like an imposter in a world that wasn't meant for him. Crystal chandeliers sparkled above like stars frozen mid-glimmer. Waitstaff and white gloves moved through the crowd with trays of champagne flutes. Everyone here looked like they'd been born knowing how to breathe in silk and speak in investments. Then he saw her. Descending the stairs like the world owed her its attention, Kaia wore a midnight blue gown that shimmered with every step she took. Her hair had been swept up, exposing a delicate line of diamonds at her throat. But it wasn't the dress or the jewels that made him forget how to move. It was the way she locked eyes with him like he was the only person in the room who mattered. You clean up better than I imagined, she said, reaching the landing. I feel like I should be serving drinks instead of drinking them, he replied, his voice low. She tilted her head. You're not here to blend in, Zayden. You're here because I wanted you here. He offered his arm. Then lead the way, boss. She took it, and together they stepped into a sea of murmurs and glances. A man near the bar did a double take. An older woman in a silk shawl narrowed her eyes. Kaia didn't flinch. Let them stare, she whispered. They crossed the room, weaving between clusters of well-dressed owners and board members. At one point, a man in a white dinner jacket intercepted them. Kaia, he said with a tight smile. We weren't expecting you to bring company. This is Zayden, she replied coolly. He's the reason my old office doesn't look like a crime scene anymore. Zayden extended a hand. Nice to meet you. The man hesitated before shaking it. Interesting choice. Kaia's voice sharpened. He's not a choice. He's my guest. The man nodded stiffly and stepped aside. Once he was gone, Zayden leaned closer. Friend of yours? Trevor Langston. He runs a hedge fund and thinks charm is something you inherit if your suit is expensive enough. I was waiting for him to ask if I valet. Kaia looked at him sideways. You would have made more than half the guests here. He chuckled, then gestured toward a corner of the room. You want to get out of the spotlight, or do you thrive on it? She paused. Let's disappear for a minute. They found a quiet alcove just outside the ballroom, where the noise faded beneath velvet curtains and moonlight filtered through tall windows. From here, the city stretched out beneath them, glittering and alive. Zayden leaned against the window frame. You ever wish you could stop climbing and just exist? She looked out over the skyline. I didn't grow up in a world where existing was enough. I had to fight for every inch. And now that you're at the top? Kaia turned toward him. Sometimes I don't know if I'm still climbing or just afraid to stop. He studied her face. You don't seem afraid of anything. That's the trick. You act like nothing scares you, and eventually, people believe it. He took a breath. I didn't expect this. Any of it. You. Tonight. She stepped closer. And yet here we are. He met her gaze. This isn't just a favor, is it? Bringing me here. Dressing me up. I don't do favors, Zayden. I make decisions. And I decided I wanted you here. He reached up and brushed a loose strand of hair back from her cheek. She didn't move away. I've got nothing to offer you, he said quietly. No connections. No portfolio. Just a kid who thinks peanut butter is a food group and a truck that barely starts in winter. Kaia's voice was steady. I don't need you to offer me anything. Then what do you want? She didn't answer right away. The silence stretched, not awkward, but heavy with something unspoken. I want someone who sees me, she said at last. Not the job. Not the title. Just me. The words hit him like a punch to the ribs. I see you, he said. Her hand slid into his, fingers curling with a confidence that wasn't forced. They stood like that for a long moment, until a distant chime signaled the start of the charity auction. She exhaled. Duty calls. I'll be here when you're done charming a roomful of billionaires. She gave him a look that said she'd rather stay right there. But she turned and walked back into the ballroom, her presence swallowing the space like a tide, every move elegant and self-assured. Zayden remained by the window, hand still warm from hers, wondering what exactly he just stepped into and why, for the first time in years, he didn't want to run from it. Rain streaked the windows of Zayden's apartment as he zipped up Mila's jacket and knelt to tie her boots. She bounced on her heels, humming a song she'd made up about pancakes and dinosaurs. You're gonna be good for Mrs. Carson? He asked, grabbing her backpack. I'm always good, she said, eyes wide with practiced innocence. He kissed her forehead. And no bribing her with gummy bears to stay up past bedtime. Mila giggled and ran toward the door, pausing only to shout. Tell the fancy lady hi. Zayden froze with one hand on the doorknob. He hadn't told Mila anything about Kaia, not really. But kids had a way of knowing things before you said them out loud. Later that night, he stood outside a narrow brick building in Midtown, rain dripping from the brim of his hoodie. Kaia had texted him the address earlier with no explanation. He hesitated for a full minute before pushing the door open. Inside, the space was warm and quiet, lit by rows of overhead bulbs strung like stars. It wasn't a restaurant or an office, it was an art gallery. Abstract paintings lined the walls, floor to ceiling, all in shades of blue, gold, and ash. Kaia stood near the far wall, arms crossed, her heels silent on the polished concrete floor. She wore a cream coat, open over a simple blouse and dark jeans. It was the most casual he'd ever seen her. You came, she said, voice soft. I almost didn't, he admitted, pulling down his hood. Thought maybe I'd walk in and realize I didn't belong. Her gaze held his. You belong wherever you decide to stand. He walked toward her, stopping a few feet away. Why here? This place belonged to my mother, she said. She opened it before I was born. It was the first thing she ever built with her own hands. Zayden looked around. It's beautiful. She passed away 6 years ago. Kaia continued, fingers tightening slightly. I haven't brought anyone here since. He didn't speak. He just waited. She taught me that real art doesn't apologize for being imperfect, she said. It just exists. Raw. Unfinished. Brave. Zayden nodded slowly. Sounds like she knew what mattered. She did. Kaia turned to face him fully. And she'd hate that I've spent the last decade treating vulnerability like a liability. He stepped closer. You're not the only one. Kaia's eyes didn't leave his. I'm not used to wanting someone who could walk away without losing anything. You think I have nothing to lose? He asked, voice low. You don't need my money. You don't need my influence. You could disappear tomorrow and still sleep at night. Zayden took a breath. You're wrong. About what? I'd lose everything if I walked away from this, he said. From you. For a moment, the only sound was the hum of the gallery's lights. Kaia's voice barely rose above a whisper. You mean that? I mean that I've spent the last 6 years building a life for my daughter. One that's honest. One where people show up when it matters. And then you walked in with your coffee and your impossible confidence, and made me feel like I was allowed to want more. She stepped forward, close enough that her coat brushed against his chest. I've never had someone look at me without calculating what I could give them. I don't want anything from you, he said. Just you. Kaia reached into her coat pocket and pulled something out. It was a key. He stared at it. What's this? Studio space, she said. A floor above the gallery. It's not much, but it's yours if you want it. For commissions. Custom work. Whatever you need. He looked at it, then at her. Why would you give me that? Because I believe in you, she said. And because I want you to stop surviving and start living. Zayden shook his head, overwhelmed. Kaia. She placed the key in his hand and closed his fingers around it. No strings. Just a beginning. He leaned in before he could think twice, his forehead resting against hers. You do realize I'm falling in love with you. I was already there, she whispered. He kissed her and felt the world tilt into place, like everything he'd been holding together with duct tape and stubbornness had finally found its foundation. Weeks passed. Zayden moved into the studio, splitting time between commissions and Mila's school pickups. He painted with the kind of focus he hadn't felt in years, surrounded by light and open air, and the knowledge that someone believed in his talent. Kaia visited often, sometimes with takeout, sometimes with new brushes she claimed were, accidentally, delivered to her office. Mila adored her instantly, even offering to share her prized unicorn stickers. One Saturday morning, Kaia arrived with something tucked under her arm. Zayden looked up from his easel as she handed it to him. A canvas. Not hers. His. Framed. Signed. Hung in the gallery downstairs. You're featuring my work? He asked, stunned. Already did, she said. Sold your first piece last night. He stared at her. You didn't have to do that. I know, she said. But I wanted the world to see what I already know. He kissed her again, right there in the studio, paint still drying behind him. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like a man trying to outrun the edge of his life. He felt like he'd finally arrived. Home wasn't a place. It was a woman in heels and sharp words who had opened a door he didn't know existed and waited on the other side until he stepped through. Kaia sat at the long oak table in the boardroom, her fingers still curled around the pen she hadn't used in 10 minutes. The quarterly review meeting dragged on, but her mind was somewhere else, specifically on the man who'd kissed her that morning with paint still on his knuckles and a quiet fire in his eyes. Kaia? She blinked. Across the table, her CFO, Miranda, was watching her with a concerned expression. Everything all right? Kaia straightened slightly. Yes. Just distracted. The meeting resumed, but her thoughts didn't. She'd spent years building her company brick by brick, negotiation by negotiation. But now, The metrics and projections felt flat, like numbers on a page next to something far more real. That night she let herself into the gallery after hours. The lights were dimmed, but Zayden was still upstairs in the studio. She could hear Mila giggling through the ceiling, her voice bright as it filtered down. Kaia made her way up the stairs and found Mila perched on a stool beside Zayden, watercolor streaks across her cheeks and paper spread like petals across the floor. "You've got a future curator on your hands," Zayden said without looking up. Mila turned. "I made a rainbow tornado." Kaia smiled. "I can see that. It's fierce." Mila beamed before hopping off the stool. "I'm thirsty. I'll grab her some water," Zayden offered. Kaia waited until Mila skipped into the kitchen with him, then slowly walked over to the large canvas hidden beneath a sheet in the corner. She lifted it gently. The painting was unfinished, but the shape was unmistakable. A woman standing in front of a skyline, arms crossed, chin lifted, unapologetic. The lines were bold, confident, and yet something about the eyes made her breath catch. When Zayden returned, she didn't turn around. "Is that me?" He set the glass down. "It's who you are when no one's watching." She faced him slowly. "You see parts of me I've spent my life trying to keep hidden." "I know." He moved closer. "That's why I painted them." Kaia looked down at the floor. "I've never let anyone inside this far." Zayden reached for her hand. "I didn't come through the front door. I built a ladder." Her throat tightened. "I'm not used to needing someone." "You don't need me," he said. "You chose me. That's stronger." She looked up, her voice quiet. "I never thought I'd find someone who could hold their ground beside me without trying to outshine me." "You shine just fine on your own," he said. "I'm here to walk beside you. Not in front of you. Not behind." Kaia leaned into him. "I want to build something that doesn't end when the paint dries." "Then let's build it." A week later, she handed in her resignation as CEO. The boardroom erupted in disbelief, but she didn't flinch. She'd appointed Miranda as successor, outlining a clear transition plan that maintained stability. "I'm not stepping back," Kaia told them. "I'm stepping into something new." She didn't owe them more than that. That afternoon, she walked into the studio where Zayden was helping Mila with her spelling homework. "I'm done," she said simply. He looked up. "With what?" "The version of my life that didn't include you." He stood slowly. "You're sure?" She crossed the room and placed her hand against his chest. "I've never been more sure of anything." 2 months later, the studio was transformed. One side remained Zayden's workspace, filled with canvases and sculptures in progress. The other side had been converted into a curated shop, Kaia's new venture. She called it Unframed. A space for undiscovered artists to showcase raw, unpolished work. No suits. No pretenses. The grand opening was modest but packed. Mila cut the ribbon with a pair of oversized scissors and declared herself Queen of Creativity, which no one dared contest. Zayden watched Kaia navigate the crowd, not as a CEO, but as a host, a partner, a woman fully in her element. She returned to him later, cheeks flushed, eyes bright. "They love it. They love you," he said. "But I get it." She laughed. "You're ridiculous." He pulled her close. "You're mine." They kissed under the strings of market lights, surrounded by laughter and the sound of music from a nearby street performer. Later that night, after Mila had fallen asleep curled between them on the couch, Kaia looked over at Zayden. "I used to think love was something that came with conditions." He stroked her hair gently. "It doesn't. Not this kind." She turned into him, her voice barely a whisper. "Promise me we'll never stop choosing each other." "Every day," he said. "Even the ones that aren't easy." She nodded, eyes closing. "Good." Years passed. The studio expanded. Mila grew into a bold, curious teenager who painted her emotions across canvas and carried her father's stubbornness and Kaia's fire. Zayden and Kaia never married not because they didn't believe in it, but because they didn't need the paperwork. They built their life in layers, with every brushstroke, every shared morning, every whispered confession in the dark. Their love wasn't loud. It didn't beg for attention. It simply existed unapologetic, enduring, and completely theirs. And that, they both knew, was more than enough.